Hi, everybody. My name is Ken Goodman. I am a member of the Board of Directors for the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. Welcome to our webinar, Self-Compassion, the Art of Tending to Your Struggles with Loving Kindness Instead of Self-Criticism, with our presenter, Kimberly Quinlan. I have been really looking forward to hosting this webinar. I've heard Kimberly speak several times, and she is incredible. You're going to love her. I will give her a proper introduction in a moment, but let me first say that this webinar is presented by the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, which is the leading nonprofit organization in the field of anxiety and depression. Our mission is to improve diagnosis and promote the prevention, treatment, and cure of anxiety, depression, and stress-related disorders through education like this webinar, practice, and research. So please take advantage of all the resources on our website, adaa.org. You will find a great list of treatment providers. Just click on Find Help at the top of the homepage. Also on the website, there is a free peer-to-peer online support group. You can find the link by scrolling down on the homepage. And if you have questions after watching this webinar, you can send an email to webinars@adaa.org. Finally, you can support ADAA by making a charitable donation on the website. This organization thrives because of your generous support. So if you find our content and our website helpful, please consider donating. We much appreciate it. So let's get started. I'm very excited to be sharing the mic with Kimberly Quinlan. Kimberly is a licensed marriage family therapist. She specializes in the treatment of anxiety, OCD, eating disorders, and body-focused repetitive behaviors. She is the founder of cbtschools.com, an online psychoeducation platform that provides courses for those with OCD and body-focused repetitive behaviors. Kimberly is also the host of Your Anxiety Toolkit podcast, a podcast with 1 million downloads. That's amazing. And it aims to provide mindfulness-based tools for anxiety, OCD, and depression. So Kimberly, I'm just really looking forward to this. It is so nice to have you, and take it away.
All right. Okay. Start whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ken, for that amazing introduction. I'm actually so happy to be here. I'm talking about a topic that I absolutely love talking about, which is self-compassion. We've called this the art of tending to your struggles with kindness instead of self-compassion. Now, the reason often I'll look at one question that often people ask, which is, why do we call it struggles? And I really wanted to make sure in this presentation that we addressed any type of struggle and any kind of adversity or pain that you're going through, because as you will probably all agree, we all have a lot of struggles right now. This is a time where I think we need this practice more than ever. So first, I wanted to talk about who is suffering or who is struggling. I think that now more than ever, and I think maybe Ken may agree, or I'd be curious to hear his thoughts on, as a clinician who treats anxiety disorders, I have been just overwhelmed with how difficult these last few years have been on people. This is a very difficult time, and I think together we are all suffering with something in some way, in some part of our life. And so I wanted again to really emphasize that we are all suffering in some way. Often when we are suffering, we feel very alone. But my hope is today that I can help you to feel less alone in your suffering, and hopefully give you some helpful tools to manage that, right?
Yeah, prior to this pandemic, 18% of the adult population suffered with an anxiety disorder, and I'm sure it is way more than that.
Way higher, way higher. And I think even those who had previous anxiety are probably really finding that the pandemic and the world the way that it is even higher than it was, pre-pandemic. So I think that this is, again, something I'm so passionate about, because sometimes we do tend to suffer in silence. And hopefully, here with ADAA, that we are sort of shifting that a little bit. Now, oops, sorry. the first thing to sort of look at here is, what is suffering? Well, from a definition standpoint, often people have a strong reaction to the word suffering, as if we have to be pitied or that we should be ashamed of that. And I really want to normalize suffering here. It is just undergoing some kind of hardship. It's just going through difficult days, difficult emotions, difficult thoughts or struggles that you may have. So I want to first take the judgment out of the word suffering and just recognize that it is just a distress. It could be any pain or hardship that you're going through. Now, I want to tell you first a story about the parable of the two arrows. This actually comes from a Buddhist philosophy, not what we're talking about religion here. We're just going to talk about a story that really resonates with me and really resonates with my patients in how we may conceptualize suffering, right? So I want you to imagine that back thousands of years, you're out in a beautiful field and you're hunting and gathering for your meal, right? Where this is, again, it's a story. So I don't want you to feel like this is in real time, and just we can use our imagination. And you're out on this beautiful mountain, and then all of a sudden you experience an intense degree of pain in your leg, and you look down at your leg and there is an arrow in your leg. There's someone from an opposing tribe, or for some reason, someone who has thought of you as a danger, has shot a bow and arrow and has put an arrow right in your leg, right? And so your natural response to this arrow is going to be, let me see here, this first arrow. We want to think of this as a metaphor for life, right? So when we have this arrow in our leg, we could consider this metaphor as something like daily events. These are things that happen that are out of our control, just like the arrow, that just tend to happen. We didn't deserve them. It's not like we'd done anything particularly wrong, but in daily life, we have a lot of first arrows, right? You get a flat tire. Somebody in your family had to go into quarantine. You spilled milk all over your clothes and you were just about to leave for your work or for school. So daily life events is a common example of a first arrow. Another one would be, don't know why, there it is, they're all coming. Other ones would be things like thoughts, feelings, sensations, and urges. So commonly what happens, particularly for those with anxiety and depression, we have a lot of first arrows, such as a thought that may be intrusive. You didn't want the thought, but it's just coming. Another one might be feelings of grief or sadness or anger or shame. These are other examples of first arrows. Another example would be sensations, such as a racing heart rate, a headache, some kind of pain that you may be feeling. And another example would be urges that you have, an urge to, often with anxiety, we have these strong urges that can be very alarming for us. So here's some examples of first arrows, including images. So for those who have post-traumatic stress disorder, you might have a lot of images that appear in your mind. I want you to think of those simply as first arrows. And these—
So Kimberly, can I ask you a question? When
Sure.
you say urges, do you mean urges to do things, either urges to avoid or urges to behave in a certain way?
Yeah, so an urge could be any kind of urge. It might be an urge to yell at somebody on the street. It might be an urge to— these urges could be ego-dystonic or ego-syntonic. It might be an urge to binge or pick and pull your hair. It might be an urge to do a compulsion. It could be any urge that we have. And again, these are things that aren't in our control. They may happen many times or several times throughout the day. Sometimes they can create a lot of anxiety, and sometimes they can create a lot of urgency, right? So these urges, again, these are all just things that happen to us that can create a lot of distress. But what happens is, when we have that first arrow, so we're out and we've recognized that we have some form of shame or some kind of feeling or pain, thought, feeling, sensation, urge, what we then do is we then engage in now getting another arrow and poking ourselves in the other leg. This is a metaphor. Again, I don't want you to think of this as real, but what we do is then once we have the first arrow, we then inflict pain on ourselves by using a second arrow. Now we understand the second arrow as some form, often in the form of self-judgment. So imagine that you've had a thought or a feeling or a sensation. You didn't want it. It's very uncomfortable, or an event happened. And then you go, you're so stupid. You shouldn't have done that. Why did you do that, right? That's the second arrow. That's the arrow that we do have some control over, right? That's often what causes us more pain than the first arrow, is when we put a lot of judgment on ourselves. Another example of that is self-criticism. We then call ourselves a lot of names, right? Often this is true, and we're constantly trying to break through with this with patients, of not to call yourself labels like crazy, stupid, weak, not cool, not enough, right? So we often, when we have the first pain that we can't control, but then what we do is we engage in this second layer of pain. Another version of the second arrow is going to be self-punishment. So self-punishment is where, when we have the first pain, let's say you get a flat tire, which was entirely out of your, control, then you might punish yourself for that. You might withhold pleasure, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit, but you might actually engage in these behaviors to sort of try to make sure it never happens again. We commonly do this is when we have an adversity or a pain in our lives, we go into a punishment phase as if that's going to prevent it from happening again, but without recognizing that the first arrow was never in our control in the first place. Right? Another one is we get angry at ourselves, right? And often we do that because we feel hopeless. When something happens in life, the pandemic is a really great example, and we feel so out of control, often what we do is we start to get very angry and blame ourselves and blame other people, because that gives us a sense of being in control again and being able to take the power back, to remove that sense of hopelessness and helplessness that we may have. And the last one, as I talked about, is the avoidance of pleasure. This is a huge one that I see a lot in my practice, is when somebody is going through a difficult time. Let's say they may have a mental disorder, an anxiety disorder, depression, is in effort to sort of punish ourselves, they will withdraw from pleasure. They won't allow themselves to have nice things. They might again, as a form of punishment, they may, I'll have conversations with my patients. I'm like, wow, you're doing so well in treatment. I hope that you're celebrating. How did you celebrate that massive win you just had? And they'll say, yeah, I did. I sat down and I had a snack, and I'll say, oh, that's great. What did you have? And they'll say, oh, I just sort of got whatever I had. And I'll ask them, like, why didn't you celebrate and give yourself a reward or give yourself some kind of pleasure? And they'll say, oh, I didn't feel like I deserved it, because anybody should be able to do that, right? Anyone should be able to get to work without having a panic attack. So it's not a big deal what I did. So, I'm not going to give myself a massive celebration for something that they've done that was really.
And they minimize their success, right? They minimize the accomplishment, the step forward.
Yeah. Right. And this is the second arrow. So I want everyone to understand that we can't control the first arrow, right? We can't control a lot of the suffering that we do have in our life, but we can actually work on reducing that second arrow that ends up creating more pain than the original arrow, right? Now, what I want to make sure we touch on here is, I don't want anyone to then start to beat themselves up because they've beat themselves up, right? Like, we don't want to create an additional layer where everyone now feels bad because they've engaged in some of these second arrow behaviors. Actually, the point of this whole talk is to learn skills to replace these behaviors. So again, recognize first that all humans do this, right? All humans naturally, innately will tend to move into these judgment, critical, punishments like behaviors. That's a part of what made us grow to be in this world, right? We've evolved because we are constantly sort of assessing for danger and so forth. But what we want to recognize is, are you engaging in these behaviors to where it's actually increasing your suffering, right? Because what we want to do is actually bring you to a place where you're not overwhelmed with suffering and you can handle those first arrows without adding to them. So I want to first ask you, and I'm going to do some reflecting here with you all, is what is your reaction to your suffering? Some people may have some of those second arrow behaviors, some may not, right? You might find that you do more of one and less of others, but I want you to reflect on, how are you responding to your suffering, the things that you're going through, the hardships, right? Often people will say, I do every single one of those, and I really want to work on that. And if that's the case for you, you're in the right place. Now, the next part here to consider is, let me go through because this isn't, okay, is I'm going to do an exercise with you. How would I tend to a loved one if they had a similar struggle? I want you to think, and take some time here, let's slow it down a little. And I want you to ask yourself, what is it that I'm struggling with? What's one thing in the last, let's say, 24 hours that has been difficult for you? Maybe you want to pick a really difficult thing, or maybe something very quite small. And I want you to bring to mind someone who you love, that you care for, and imagine that they too were going through this, right? This suffering, this struggle. And I want to ask you, what might you say to them if they were going through a similar thing? Even, let's say, if you had severe depression or an anxiety disorder and you were feeling really stuck in that disorder, I want you to think about, if that loved one was going through very similar or exact symptoms, what might you tell them, right? And often people will say something like, they would say, oh, I'm so sorry you're going through this. How can I help you, right? This isn't your fault, right? How can I support you? That's what they would say, right?
They give you a nice big hug.
Yeah, exactly. They would usually offer you some words of kindness, right? Now, then you might want to think about, just as Ken has suggested, how might you shift your body language towards them if you knew they'd shared with you, or you knew they were going through a difficult time? Would you lean in? Would you hug them? Maybe would you put your hand, if it were appropriate, would you put your hand on their shoulder? Would you soften your eyes towards them, maybe smile, right? Would you sit a little closer to them if that were appropriate, right? And so you might know that your body language shifts when you consider someone else going through a difficult time, right? You might also think about, what do you feel in your body towards that person, right? Is there a sense of wishing them well, wanting to relieve their struggle, this deep sense of wanting to make sure they don't feel alone, right? Inside your body, you already know how to tend to your own suffering because you do it for other people, right? A lot of times when people come to me and I'm teaching them these skills, they'll say, no, I've beat myself up for so many years. I'm a lost cause. And I always remind them, no, you're not. You do this for other people. And now it's a matter of you practicing doing what you would do for a loved one, but doing it for yourself, right? This is such an important practice. And in my opinion, the more you suffer, the more you want to practice this, right? You want to meet your suffering with as much kindness as you can. So always think about that. Next time you're suffering, I want you to check in and go, all right, if Kimberly or Ken were going through this, what would I say to them? Or if a loved one was going through this, what might I say? And then practice doing that towards yourself. Another way of practicing this practice of self-compassion, which I'm going to go through in here in just a second, is this amazing question that I want you to get into the habit of asking yourself, which is, what do I need right now? Right? Often when we're suffering, we've had, as I use the example of a flat tire, or you've spilt milk, or you're going through a difficult time, or you've made a massive mistake, which we all do, we're all imperfect. Instead of going into beating yourself up and punishing yourself, you might want to ask yourself, what is it that I need? Right? Sometimes that might be, I just need a minute. I just need a minute to sort of work through this. It might be, I need a hug, like Ken said. I just need to know that I'm not alone in this suffering. I need to feel connected to somebody, right? It might be asking yourself, what do you need? Now, let me actually stop there for a quick second and address a really important thing. Is a lot of the time with anxiety and depression, if we're working through those, especially if you're working with a therapist, they may actually have you be doing some homework that is really hard, right? Doing some skills for homework that nobody wants to do. It's really hard work. It takes a lot of your energy. You already don't have any energy, and it feels so big and hard. So asking yourself, what do I need right now, might be a helpful question to help you to get that homework done, to get the hard things done, right? Because sometimes we do have to face our fear. We do have to face our adversities and go to work. And instinctually, if you ask yourself, what do I need right now? It might be to say, avoid everything, right? Let's just shut it all down. I don't want to deal with it today, which is a normal human response. But checking in and asking, what do I need right now, is a really helpful way to get through the hard things. Oh, as I do this hard thing, I really just need to be gentle, or I really need to give myself a break and not place such high expectations on myself. I really need to be mindful of the negative thinking I'm having. Instead of believing every thought I have, I might actually just instead observe them. So this exercise can be helpful to help you through just that first arrow, but it can also be helpful to get you through facing your fear and getting through hard things and getting through a pandemic, right? I have to constantly check in with myself. What do I need to be able to face this day, right? All right. I want to now talk about the actual practice of self-compassion, because that is what all of this is about. Those practices that we just did is the 100% practice of self-compassion, right? So if you were able to do some of that while we were going through it, you're already doing the work, right? So similar to the exercise, quickly I'll give a definition. Self-compassion is the art and practice of giving yourself the same compassion you would give a loved one, right? So it's kindness, respect, and nurturing yourself just like you would a loved one, right? It's quite simple. But that can feel really overwhelming, especially for those who have practiced, they have a gold medal in self-criticism, right? And they've really put in their time doing that practice. And so I want to break things down for you a little bit and just show you 3 components of self-compassion that may help you, particularly if you're new to this concept. Now, the 3 components of self-compassion were created by Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer. They are the researchers who have created a lot of research and a lot of resources to help people build a self-compassion practice. And so they've outlined them in this way. The first one is mindfulness. Mindfulness is being aware of what's happening in this present moment without judgment. Now, I want you to think of this as like a huge practice. I'm sure even you may have taken some webinars through ADAA on mindfulness, but for right now, just think of it as the act of being aware of what's going on in your body. So we'll use an example. You have faced a first arrow, right? Sometimes it's like the minute you wake up, you get a first arrow, and sometimes it's not until lunchtime, right? But let's say you wake up, first thing, you get hit by anxiety or something doesn't go well, you get a call that you didn't want to get. The first step is to be aware, okay, I'm going through something. I'm facing my first arrow, right? That's mindfulness. The second is common humanity. Common humanity is a core component of self-compassion because the research has shown that the more we suffer, the more we isolate and the more alone we feel, right? Sometimes when we're struggling with something, we feel like no one would understand, that no one would get exactly what I'm going through. And compassion and self-compassion is stopping and recognizing that I'm not alone in this suffering. One of the most wonderful parts about the work that I do is when people will email me or leave me a message saying, I had no idea. I thought I was the only person who struggled with this. I thought I was the only person who was having a difficult time with this one specific thing. And that just knowing that they're not alone allowed them to drop the judgment that there's something wrong with them, right? It's such an important part because so much of our judgment is based on stigma. Something's wrong with me. I must be crazy. I must be, less than. I must be, we do all these labels basically saying I'm the only person who's really bad here and everybody else must be coping fine, right? Common humanity is recognizing that we're all in this together, right? Now, if let's say you're going through something and you don't know any one person who's been through what you're going through, that may be true. I don't want to discount anybody's suffering here. But what we can recognize that while the people around us may not know exactly what you're going through, chances are they've felt something very, very similar. They know the feeling of shame. They know the feeling of grief. They too have had anxiety. They too may have lost a loved one or have, had a major blow to their career or their schooling, right? And so even though they may not have gone through exactly that, chances are we can connect with the fact that humans often feel very similar emotions about things and the same emotions are painful, right? The last step of self-compassion is the most important, which is loving kindness. And I will walk you through an exercise here very soon. But this is just the art of being gentle, being caring, nurturing yourself as you go through the discomfort that you're feeling, right? This is incredibly important, particularly right now, because we have been flooded with a lot of pain, right? And so what we want to do is we want to create safety for that emotion and that suffering, right? When we suffer, we don't want ourselves to beat ourselves up for it. We want to actually have a place where we can have the suffering without making it worse. Okay. So what I want to do is we're going to do a quick exercise here. Using those three different components, I want you now to think about a recent struggle that you've had. And we're going to work through what we call a self-compassionate break. A self-compassionate break is, and I'll go through it with you. You may want to get a little pad and write this down if you like, but if not, you can just go through and freeze this recording. So the first thing here is mindfulness. I want you to write down, it's really helpful if you write it down. What are you noticing? What triggered you, right? And it could be just one sentence like, my friend judged me, right? Or I didn't get picked for the team that I wanted to get picked for, right? So you're just identifying what is the thing that you're dealing with? What is the first arrow, right? For those of you who have, there's not actually an event, but it's more like I'm anxious, or I'm noticing my heart is racing, or it might be I'm having a panic attack, right? So just quickly just jot down, what are you mindful about? It's more like the facts here, right? So you're just saying what happened. The second step is you're going to then practice a statement of common humanity. So common humanity is, again, how am I not alone in this? What could you write in this? The second statement, this is second line, is how is this connecting me to others and their suffering, right? often what I write here is, it makes complete sense that I feel this way. Or I might write, anybody else in this situation would feel the same way or would be struggling with this situation, right? And then the last one is loving kindness. Loving kindness is where you offer yourself some statement of gentleness. So let me go back to that. How can I care for myself during this suffering? This is often the hardest. Some people totally blank on this one and they're like, this feels like a foreign language, right? But here is where I want you to offer yourself the words that you would offer a friend, right? Get into the practice of offering the words. It might be, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Or that sounds really hard. How can I support you? When you finish this, you can read it back. And what you'll hear is something like, right now I am suffering with, and you can fill the blank in. The next part is, I'm not alone in this suffering. There are many other people who are going through what I'm going through. And then the last sentence is, how can I support you? I'm sending you love during this time. This is really difficult for you, right? So you're validating yourself instead of criticizing. This can be really helpful, particularly if you're very, very new to this. And it's a way to make it like a bit of a practice where you know the steps, particularly if you're flooded with strong emotions. It can be incredibly helpful to write it down. Some people, I know a lot of my students and my clients have had this in their wallet. They take it with them in their purse. When they're struggling, they pull it out. And it helps just direct them away from self-criticism and self-punishment and brings them back to just an intention, right, of being compassionate. Now, one thing to remember here is a lot of people don't feel a thing. They struggle with this. They say, I'm doing this, but I don't feel anything about this. And your job, again, is just to be gentle and kind about your attempts to be gentle and kind, right? This, you don't have to win this. This is something that you strengthen like a muscle, and it will take time, right? So let's, again, not criticize ourselves for having a hard time with this.
In other words, it may not feel authentic at first.
100%. 100%. And I think that's true for a lot of people. A lot of people may have practiced this and stopped practicing it because they just felt so disconnected from it. But again, your intention to want to be compassionate is a compassionate act. You get points for that, right? Your wish to treat yourself kindly is a self-compassionate act. You get points for that, right? That's growth. So just the genuine intention and desire to move in this direction is all you need, right? And sometimes, I'm not going to lie, I have written books on this. I talk on this every day with clients. I have practiced this for many years. And there are some days where I fully fall backwards and go back to old behaviors. So it's like a journey. It's not something that's linear, that you're just like, you get it and you're done and it's final. You're now a self-compassionate person. This is something that is a practice. You'll take some steps forward. You'll take some steps back. Your job, if you're struggling with self-compassion, is to use that as another opportunity to tend to your discomfort in a kind way.
So just as an example, this weekend, I injured my left leg. So in terms of being loving and kind to myself, I told myself, okay, it will get better. I told myself, just be patient and just do the best you can and hobble around the best you can and rest the leg. And then a couple of days later, I got better.
Yeah. Yeah. And so really you had, the first arrow was hurting your leg.
Yes.
But you saved yourself that second pain of beating yourself up, right? Because you could have spent the entire time you were in pain going, I shouldn't have done that. If I could have prevented it, what's wrong with me? You know, you could have used all these words that were really unkind, but instead you just coached yourself through kindly.
Right. How long is this going to take to get better? What if it doesn't get better? What if it gets worse?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And so a lot of the work we do, and I didn't include this in this presentation, is adopting what I call a kind coach voice, right? Which often when we think of a coach, we usually think of like that really tough basketball or football coach who's like, get down and give me 20. You made a mistake, so you're going to run laps this afternoon and you're going to learn a lesson. That's sort of what we think about, and that's our default. But what we can do is we can start to practice that coach that's really motivating, but is also kind, right? When we have to do something difficult, the kind and compassionate coach says, yeah, you're doing hard things over there. Keep going, do 1 minute at a time, right? Keep trying, you're doing great. That's what a kind coach would do. So it's a little tip, particularly for those who, and I think it's true for all of us, is, we sometimes attach our attention to like, when will this be over? As if that's the solution, but really that doesn't end up being the solution. The real solution that actually doesn't create more suffering is just to tend to our discomfort, right? Not saying we're ruminating in it, but just to gently tend to the discomfort that rises and falls in us. So yeah, great point. All right. So let's now talk about roadblocks, right? There are lots and lots of roadblocks to self-compassion. I did a poll of all the people on my social media. About 1,500 people weighed in on the most common roadblocks to why they struggle with self-compassion. And I wanted to share them with you because, again, that is common humanity, right? It helps us to see that we're definitely not alone. One of the most common self-compassion roadblocks is high expectations and perfectionism, right? If your expectation is to get an A, right, or to get 100%, not that there's anything wrong with that per se, but one of the main reasons that we tend to criticize is when we put such high expectations and you don't meet it because getting 100% is very hard, you're naturally going to default to self-criticism, right? Perfectionism is a very common roadblock to compassion because we tell ourselves, I should be better. I should be smarter. I should have gotten 100%. I shouldn't be struggling, right? So these ideas that we should be perfect often get in the way. Another one is a fear of becoming lazy. This is the one I hear the most. A lot of people have written to me emails and saying, I love this idea of self-compassion, but if I let myself off the hook and I start to not beat myself up, I am going to turn into someone who is lazy, who doesn't do anything, doesn't go to work. I will completely let myself go. Now, I will talk about this here in a second, but I want to nip this one in the bud. Research shows that people who are self-compassionate are more motivated and procrastinate less, right? They tend to finish out activities in a much easier way because they're not beating themselves up, right? So we actually have tons of evidence to go against this. Okay, the next one here is the fear of becoming self-absorbed. A lot of people think that self-compassionate people are like, I'm the best, I'm the coolest, I'm, nothing can hurt me, and that is not true either. In fact, that's not even a practice of self-compassion. Compassion is just saying, wow, you're suffering. How can I support you? It's not saying you're the best, you're the winner, you're better than everybody else, right? That's definitely not self-compassion if that's what's happening, right? So I just wanted to drop in and discuss that. The next one is believing that one must be punished for their struggle, right? This is true particularly for people who have some kind of mental health struggle, right? I see this a lot, particularly in OCD, which is one of my specialties, is they believe that they must be punished for their intrusive thoughts. They must be punished for the depression that they feel. They must be punished for not being able to get out of bed. These are common beliefs around self-compassion, that punishment is the only way that I'm going to fix this problem. And again, we have so much evidence that beating yourself up actually increases depression, increases anxiety. Self-compassion actually decreases anxiety, decreases depression, increases well-being. And then the last one is often, and this is a big piece here that I want to address, is in the mindfulness component of self-compassion, you do have to recognize that you are struggling. And sometimes that in and of itself can be very painful for people because they don't want to feel these feelings. I don't want to feel anxious. I don't want to feel depressed. I don't want to feel anything negative. And so the act of self-compassion can sometimes actually, to start with, increase your emotions. And that may be hard for people who want to suppress emotions. It won't be forever though. So it may increase your emotions to start with, but again, then you swoop in and you take care of that emotion and you hold that emotion in kindness instead of in criticism. But often that is a main roadblock, is people, they say, I don't want to feel my feelings. They're just too much, too painful. Okay. And then the last one is depression. Some people struggle with compassion just because they've lost hope, right? They feel like there's no hope for me. I'm a lost cause is another common one that I hear people say. All right, so I'm going to finish us off here with a practice of compassion. This will be if this is new to you, this will be your first attempt at compassion. I'm going to lead the way, so you don't have to do anything except listen and do your best. If at any point it gets a little too much, just again, go through the steps, be mindful. Remind yourself that a lot of people struggle with this. That's your common humanity. And then try to return back to the loving kindness. Okay. So if you would like, again, this is the last activity. You can close your eyes or you may just sit quietly. And I want you to gently bring your attention to your breath or any object that feels grounding and kind to you. And if possible, allow yourself to soften any areas of tension, maybe your jaw, your neck, your shoulders, your tummy, your legs. And you may also offer yourself a loving touch at this time. I love to put my hand on my heart. You can do that if that feels good to you. If you have a headache, you may want to put your hand on your forehead. If you've got a particular area that's uncomfortable, you may want to tenderly just touch that area. And now gently and slowly and affectionately offer yourself these phrases. So silently or out loud, repeat, may I be filled with loving kindness. May I be safe from inner and outer dangers. May I be well in my body and mind. And may I be at ease and be happy. As you practice these phrases, imagine your heart radiating loving kindness throughout your entire body. You may also offer yourself your own personal loving kindness sentence or phrase, something that feels lovely to you. And as you practice this, note any word or posture or gesture that creates a sense of kindness in your body. Now, it's entirely okay if this feels completely awkward. You may also notice emotions that don't feel anything like loving kindness. As each of these emotions arise or thoughts arise, try to offer them loving kindness as well. If you notice any intrusive thoughts occurring, that's okay. try to be gentle and allow them as well. Gently note any of these thoughts, feelings, sensations, urges, images, and offer them the following statements. May I give myself permission to fully allow this experience. May I offer myself unconditional kindness at this moment. May I offer myself warmth and tenderness as I work through these struggles. Once again, try not to judge yourself as you go through this process. If you would like, widen your offering of loving and kindness to include others. You may send loving kindness to someone you love, to those who may have similar struggles as you, or to all living beings. Offer them all of the phrases below. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be safe from inner and outer dangers. May we be well in body and mind. May we be at ease and be happy. As you near the end of this meditation, gently offer yourself permission to be completely imperfect in these self-compassionate practices and throughout your life. Okay, you can gently open your eyes. Well done. I've included in the slides some of the main things that were included. Again, some people like to take screenshots, particularly of ones that really resonate with them. So I'm just going to show you those there.
Can I offer a suggestion? Oftentimes people who have a habit of beating themselves up, that's just sort of what they do. And if you want to counter this and become more loving and kind to yourself, as Kimberly has been talking about, is that you listen to that meditation every day.
Mm-hmm.
You need to experience that every single day. Listening to it once, fine, but every day is going to be so much better.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that long. It was only, I think, 5 minutes maybe.
Right. And I encourage people to listen to it and practice it with different areas that they're struggling, right? Because different things can show up too. Sometimes when I'm doing this for myself, my mind immediately goes to like what I'm immediately suffering with, right? Like pain or anxiety or, stress or whatever. But sometimes just offering it for, a different particular time in our life which was really difficult, can also be helpful, of just tending to previous things that you struggled with as well. There's no right way to do it, right? This is a practice where you could do 1 or 2 minutes a day. You could do 2 hours a day. I try to actually check in as many times as I can throughout the day. I use the self-compassionate break all the time. I have a little notepad next to me. And if there's particularly something that I need to work through, I will sit down and just go through those 3 points. So any of the tools we use today, you can use at any time, right? And the more you use them, the better you will become.
And it's fantastic. Thank you so much, Kimberly. Can you tell us a little bit about your podcast, how often it takes place, and what types of things you guys cover?
Sure. So the podcast is free. It comes out every Friday. It is a mindfulness and self-compassion based podcast. And we just talk about tools, right? So every week we jump on, we celebrate wins. People submit the hard things that they've been doing, because again, I really believe we should celebrate the difficult things that we're going through, even though they're so hard. We should just recognize that we're getting through them. And so, yeah, it just brings me so much joy to connect with people via the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for donating your time and your wisdom and your knowledge. And if anyone has any questions for Kimberly, they certainly can go to the ADA website and ask a question. And thank you again so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.